Welcome to Hash It Out, a podcast built by data security experts. We decipher the data security landscape through honest conversations about today's headlines and tomorrow's challenges. Brought to you by Virtru. Let's dive in.
On this episode of Hash It Out, former FBI and NSA expert Wayne Chung and ex-DHS Zero Trust leader Don Yeske join Virtru's Shannon Vaughn to uncover why career federal employees are leaving their blue badges behind for Virtru's innovative tech and mission-driven culture, fueling real impact in the defense arena and beyond. Let's hash it out.
All right, welcome everyone to today's episode of Hash It Out. I'm Shannon Vaughn, General Manager of Virtru's Federal Practice, and today we have a conversation with two special guests. Our title says it all, why federal cybersecurity leaders are coming to Virtru. So, as I mentioned, our two guests. First is Don Yeske. Don served as the CTO of the Department of the Navy and most recently was the director of the National Security Cyber Directorate or Division at DHS. And Wayne Chung, who's our CTO, he served at NSA's think tank, later on as the CTO of the FBI. Today continues to serve and advise DARPA as well as the FISA courts on the future of technology and security. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us here today.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Glad to be here.
Yeah. All right. So first, I kind of want to dive into you guys' background. Don, I think first I'll open with you. I love your background. You led cyber strategy both at the Department of Navy and at DHS. Be interested to see what were some of the biggest challenges or issues that kind of kept you up at night, and how did those experiences shape your view of protecting data? That's what Virtru does, and not just the systems. I'd be really interested to understand your thoughts there.
Sure. So just by way of context, when I was working with Don CIO, most recently as the CTO, I had a hand in standing up the DoD's Zero Trust Portfolio Management Office. And so if anyone is to blame for getting it wrong, for not focusing on the right things, and it's going to sound like maybe I'm throwing some shade here. I want you to know up front, I'm throwing it at myself. And I think we did what we knew how to do, and we focused on some of the right things in standing up that office and outlining its mission and its functions and trying to get it equipped and organized. It was something that I was one of several people who had a hand in that. And I think they've done outstanding work. The most mature, widely used zero trust architecture in the federal government is the one that the DoD has put together. And Randy Resnick has done amazing work by putting an answer on the board, saying, hey, we're going to define what it is that we intend to do in the name of zero trust, and we're going to define a timeline upon which we will do that. All of that is amazing work. The thing that worries me, that has worried me for a while, that I've become worried about, is that we didn't focus on protect surfaces in setting up all of that. And I've asked Randy this question, hey, are you primarily thinking about the attack surface, or are you thinking about protect surfaces? And his answer, honestly, was, I'm thinking about the attack surface. I want to protect everything. I want to be good at protecting everything. And it's admirable, and it's what they've set out to do. And it is as specific as we were going into this. Here's the problem. The attack surface and I'll borrow a euphemism from the guy who invented zero trust, John Kindervag. The attack surface is like the universe. It's constantly expanding. It is large and unknowable. And, if that is what you were trying to protect, you will fail. Like, by definition, the attack surface is too large to know and too large to defend holistically. For that reason, when I was leading zero trust implementation for DHS, we varied from that approach, and we wrote the first federal architecture ever that defined the term protect surface.
Yep.
even though if you were to talk to John Kindervag about zero trust for more than 30 seconds, that term would come up.
Yeah.
The 5-step process that John outlines for anyone implementing zero trust, the first step is figure out what your protect surface is. What is it that you're trying to protect? And then everything else is based on that knowledge. And the journey itself is carved up into chunks that are measured by protect surface by protect surface, right? It makes an interminable journey doable, because if you understand what your protect surfaces are and you chunk through them one at a time, you can then break that journey up for the purpose of, schedule management, resource management, right? Managing your investments, all of it. What keeps me up at night, what worries me, is we just published that architecture for DHS right before I left.
Yeah.
And I think, and the DHS components, it wasn't just me, right? There's a team over there and they'll keep that going. But I worry that, that we're going to miss the point again, that, hey, the point of this was figure out what you're trying to protect, apply protections as closely as possible to that data, application, asset, or service, right? And pay attention to that and build your defenses outward from the center. I worry that we're just not going to move into that phase, and we'll remain stuck on the attack surface forever.
I think, yeah, I'll have a question later for you, kind of talking about ZT mandates and kind of where we think we all are, but I think your points are well founded. Wayne, over to you. You spent your career across a number of different areas. At FBI specifically as the CTO, you guys dealt with some of the the highest stakes kind of missions. All of us come out of kind of DoD and IC, but failure is never an option kind of in our line of work. I also really appreciate what you're doing now with DARPA and the FISA courts. Little pivot kind of to what I asked Don, but like how have those experiences kind of changed the way you think about trust, securing sensitive data, accountability, visibility? I'd be interested in your thoughts there.
All right, thanks. So it's interesting because each of those roles operate very differently.
Yep.
And they each have their own sensitivities, and from intentionally being public to being extremely sensitive and close hold, right? So it runs the gambit. And coming from the IC, the work from the FBI was actually a lot more different than some of the previous work I'd done. At the CTO, we supported everything technology-wise across the enterprise, and that covers the gamut, developing data analytics. We pushed out data analysts into the field. We supported cloud migration through commercial, government, secret cloud service providers, as well as everything from helping the FBI build out new what we call network investigative techniques, and the more mundane acquiring new multi-function printers and cell phone plans. So it really did run the gamut from really whiz-bang high-tech stuff for the hostage rescue team to the more mundane, how do we get everyone, the taxpayer, a better deal on cell phones, as well as protecting that data. And everything at the Bureau typically operates at the secret unclass level. And in criminal cases, the FBI is actually required to hand over that data to the courts and to the public as part of discovery, which is actually a really good thing if you support a functioning judiciary, right? You want the defendant to actually have all the same information. Everything's out in the open. You know what happened. The facts are the facts. And then it gets even more granular because like the need to know really drove an operational tempo, and you wanted to be able to say, hey, you're part of this case. You need to see this data. The case has migrated or shifted. We need to bring some different resources in. So it was a really mixed and dynamic workplace. DARPA is also really mixed in that not all the performers are cleared. And in fact, many aren't even U.S. citizens, and the rare occasion. DARPA is really looking to bring the best or the latest in technology into the DoD. And they don't really care where that technology comes from. They want to enable it, they want to support it, and they want to make that world where technology is no longer the question, and provide that to the warfighter. And then finally, FISA, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, is it's the exact far opposite. It's extremely sensitive, but the data has to transit between various agencies as it migrates its way through the system. But the common thing with all of them is that the data only has value, the data only works when we can actually share it and share it carefully, right? And so when the FBI has case data, they need to make sure that the right agents see it, the wrong agents don't see it. For example, in the case of Hansen, right, they actually FBI was investigating itself for insider threats. And then it goes out to the prosecution and out to the defense. And then the same with DARPA. They want to be able to control this information, whether it's unclassified or sensitive or secret. They want to make sure that only the performers have access, that it's not out there and about. And then the data is actually, the investments that DARPA makes on behalf of the DoD really have value to the DoD and aren't sort of lost into the ether or to our enemies. And so I think that's one of the bigger things is sort of realizing, yes, in all forms of government, from the IC down to the sort of more public FBI and DARPA, it really is about the data, how you use it. It has to be out there, it has to be shared, but it has to be controlled in how it's shared. And that's sort of a common thread that has come throughout those different roles.
No, that's great. And I really appreciate that both of you are on this call, because I think you've both seen kind of that full cybersecurity vendor landscape, right? Everything from the most mundane IT function to the most sensitive of sensitive, intelligence sharing. Also, kind of the reason why I want to bring this Hash It Out together is, given your guys' impressive background, there's probably a lot of people kind of asking, like, you could have gone anywhere, right? You could have gone to any company. Selfishly, I'd kind of want to know, what was it about Virtru with the tech stack or the culture? Was it the TDF, kind of how I got introduced to Virtru, 10 plus 15 years ago when it was coming out of NSA. I'd be interested in, what kind of grabbed your attention, or, what kind of led you to kind of considering moving out of the federal, government space and coming to private industry, specifically at Virtru. Don, I'll ask you first, I guess.
Sure. So you're right. I don't know that I've met every vendor under the sun, but I feel like I've met a lot of them in the last several years. And I tried as a government employee to be as available as possible to industry, just for the purpose of it, not necessarily pitching their products, but, we tried to build intentional partnerships with various vendors, large and small. And that's because you want to take on board a series of good ideas that can only come from multiple places. I invested in that through various public-private partnerships. And so you're right. I've met a lot of vendors. Why Virtru? Well, when it became clear that it was time for me to leave the federal government, I was aware of Virtru. I want to be clear. I've never been a Virtru customer. As a government employee, I never worked anywhere where we bought a Virtru product, to my knowledge.
Yep, I did.
But I was aware of Virtru. Shannon, you and I met, through various conferences and speaking engagements. But also, I was aware of Virtru as a company and what Virtru has been doing for more than the last decade. I was aware of OpenTDF as a standard. I even quoted OpenTDF as one standard to watch in the DHS Zero Trust implementation strategy, which we published about 4 months after I took over Zero Trust at DHS, a little more than a year and a half ago.
Yep. And
so I mentioned it by name because it is a government open standard, but also because it is unique. It really should not be understated how unique what Virtru does is in the marketplace. I'm not aware of any other product offering that very specifically goes after adding policy directly to an object in the form of layers of encryption, protecting that object. That's just brilliant. And Will Ackerley, by all accounts, incredibly brilliant guy came up with that concept, and a lot of brilliant engineers have followed after that, and added and added and added. But it is also the most difficult thing for the federal government, right? We have, depending on which version of zero trust architecture you subscribe to, if you're looking at CISA's model, it has 5 pillars. If you're looking at DoD's model, it has 7 pillars. There are a couple out there that have 8 pillars. All of them, though, have a data pillar.
Yep.
And usually it's portrayed in the very center, because what we're trying to do is protect the data, right? And I answered on behalf of DHS. I drove our answer to inquiries from GAO, right, and from various other parts of the federal government that were empowered to ask us questions about how we were doing on zero trust. And if you were to look at our answers in public, we acknowledge the data pillar is where we really struggle.
Yep.
There are reports out there that I'm sure we could link to here that say that it's not just DHS, it's not just DoD. In 4 or 5 years of conversations at the Committee on National Security Systems, at AFCEA, go anywhere and talk to anyone from any other government agency and ask them what the hardest pillar is for them. Data will be it. Where have you made the least progress? Data.
Yep.
So what Virtru does is unique. And it's also the most difficult thing that anyone has on their plate to do. And this is a tragic flaw of mine. I tilt at windmills, and this was a windmill. And so when it became clear to me that it was time to move into the private sector, I was attracted to Virtru because it's an important problem, because it's the most difficult problem we face across government, and really not just government, and because I'm attracted to really hard problems like that.
Well, that's great. I will say that, whether you look at a 5 pillar ZT model, 7, 8, I think a lot of people think of ZT in a network or endpoint application, kind of security context. Kind of tying back into what I said earlier, I'd be interested, Wayne, if you look at the government's, U.S. government's, ZT mandate in the 2027 deadline, how do you think agencies are looking to meet that? To Don's point, like, the data pillar is the hardest. I think every CIO and CISO would agree with that in USG. Do you think that agencies are on target? Are they going to meet that 27 deadline, or, where can they play catch up? I guess if they're not.
I hope they will. But I also, I am a bit of a pessimist, so I don't know if they'll make it all the way there, but at least they're going to make some headway. I think all the agencies understand zero trust as a concept. And I think organizations like DoD and DHS is really, as well as NIST, in putting out various guidelines, have really been helping educate and helping folks understand what zero trust really means for an enterprise. And I think most organizations really do get it. You still get some that maybe they may kind of view it as like, oh, it's like the early days of cybersecurity where you sprinkle encryption on and then you're done. Yeah. Where it's really about how do you protect your data? What's the risk you're willing to accept? And then moving beyond to, gone are the days of, well, the application administrator, the database administrator, or the, SharePoint administrator, they're allowed to see everything because that's just how the systems work. And so, we've learned through various reasons like that's just not the case. That's not how life should be. And bad things can happen. And so I think a lot of organizations are really taking to heart what zero trust means. It's about letting the data and letting the right people work together in the right way. And so I think organizations can really, it's a long journey. And when I was at NSA, actually, Will and I were in the same development program, and that's where we met. It was a multi-year journey for NSA to really understand, like once we had ZTDF or TDF, what do you do with it? How do you integrate it into your workflows? How do you integrate it into your mission apps? What do people do with it? But we got to a place eventually where it was really, really nice, where I could share data to another analyst and the system just worked. It said, oh, they have the need to know, they're in the right mission space, they have the right attributes. Yes, that link will resolve, or no, they don't. It won't resolve. You prevented a data spill, you've not prevented a leak, and no harm, no foul. But it really enabled folks to actively sort of work to say, can we get the right data in front of the right people? And I think a lot of organizations are looking at that, and they're embracing how can we sort of accelerate our journey by looking to how do we bring in the right tools, whether it's how do we bring in some additional AI or folks to help us tag our data and put the right attributes? How do we even think about our policies? And then how do we then integrate our applications to work with the policies themselves, and then apply sort of ACRs and ACEs and sort of all the other access controls that you need to. I think a lot of organizations are looking to the private sector, and I think Virtru is actually uniquely positioned in both being built on an open standard. It's also a soon-to-be NATO CCEB standard, but also with our proprietary tools that enable you to really accelerate your journey and taking those open standards and making use of them and integrating them into your mission space. So I'm hopeful, but I at least feel confident that the right organizations, they know where they want to go. Now it's just a matter of getting there and getting their ducks in a row.
Yeah, I think it's about execution pace now. Yeah. One of the things I love that you talked about is, the operational context. I like to always say, like, you can have the best, tool in the world, but if nobody uses it, it's worthless. What is the reason for why we employ these technologies? Well, it's to get after operations, right? Like, the real things matter. One of the things that I think we've seen concretely recently around, ZTDF, or the Zero Trust Data Format, which is an expansion off of TDF, where it incorporates some of the NATO STANAGs onto the TDF spec, is allowing for partners and allies to come together and join up and be, interoperable, right? So this idea of data-centric interoperability, I think we're seeing it right now actively being exercised in a thing called Operation High Mast, led by the United Kingdom. I love this. I love this use case, right? We've been exercising for years under the Bold Quest series, and then Project Olympus, and now we're seeing it through High Mast, led by a partner nation. What's great about it is, it is ships underway, transiting across different U.S. combatant commands, areas of responsibility, and be able to share information, freely. So you kind of go on the offense, right? Is one of the things we say. Like, cybersecurity doesn't have to be a defensive posture. You can be offensive in how you're sharing data. I think one of the questions that I'd probably have to maybe Don or Wayne is, speaking to kind of ZTDF and that interoperability, like, what do you think, not only the immediate use case of like partners sharing, like, where do you think this goes over the next, 1, 3, 5 years, right? I mean, this is as cutting edge of a technology there is in the cybersecurity space. Like, where do you think we're going with things like this?
So I'll start, Wayne, if you don't mind, and then dive in. But I read an article recently that was quoting the Department of Navy CDAO, Chief Data and Analytics Officer, I believe, and he was talking about unleashing our data that is currently locked up aboard ships. Mm-hmm. And if you think about it, each vessel that's out there is just awash in data, sensor data, right? But also, data that's generated aboard the ship, right? Logistical data about the ship, maintenance data about the ship. And other kinds of data that are, available through various links that the ship, slips into and out of as it does its mission. So there's just a ton of data out there. And the point that Don CIO as an organization was raising here is that all that data needs to be made available at speed to algorithms that need it to do things that we can't imagine yesterday that we need to do today, right? There are use cases that will emerge and change and reemerge in a matter of 24 hours. And we talked about this years and years ago in the Marine Corps Enterprise Network Modernization Plan. It opened with a vignette about Marines on a small island in the Pacific somewhere who receive a software update, and the next day they recognize that what they thought was just noise is actually a submarine, right? Like those kinds of things we were imagining, and then war broke out in Ukraine, and now the Ukrainians are living them. They're actually developing TTPs, they're developing countermeasures, they're developing both offensive and defensive cyber and cyber kinetic strategies in a matter of 24, 48, 72 hours. And going back and forth with a much larger, much better funded, right, presumably first world military, and holding their own because they're innovating at speed. It is an amazing, amazing thing to see. I think we always fight, we always prepare ourselves to fight the last war. And we have a unique opportunity right now to see what the next war actually looks like and to position ourselves to compete well. And I'll say finally that we're not well positioned to compete so long as we are handcuffed, and we're handcuffed so long as our data is trapped. Do we really think that our strategic adversaries and competitors in the world are handcuffing themselves the way we are? That they're holding their data in a bag, nobody can see it, right? And not allowing, this data to be processed on this network with this resource because it's too sensitive? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And so long as our adversaries and competitors are not constrained in that way, we have to figure out how to not be constrained in that way. And we have to do that without giving up the protections around that data. And I don't see another way for us to practically do that at scale or at speed, other than by maturing this technology that's been coming on for, 12, 15 years now.
That's very well said. Wayne, anything to add there?
Just building on that, like the world is an increasingly a dangerous place. The number of folks exposed to state-based conflicts has increased exponentially. And one of the side effects is that we actually have this notion of sort of non-establishment coalitions being formed. Ukraine is a nice example, right? They're not NATO, they're not formally part of the EU, and so how do we have these and increasingly this in these situations? How do you dynamically form these communities, create them rapidly, and moving away from our traditional? Well, we need to set up infrastructure, we need to set up servers, we need to create identities, create credentials, and then expand and wire out these networks where we can now start engaging with a brand new coalition is just not realistic, right? Especially at the pace and speed of modern combat. And also, even before combat, just intelligence sharing to prevent conflict. How do we rapidly share data? How do we do that, especially with folks that we normally don't engage with, who aren't part of established coalitions or communities? And I think technologies like ZTDF are really going to start to enable that, where we can allow for third-party sharing. We can much more rapidly. We can allow for new coalitions to form, as well as even getting down to granularities of who can read data elements, who can create data elements, and even specifying what type of systems. Because you asked sort of where do we see this in the future, and I totally see us in the future where not only can you sort of entitle data to types of users or types of coalitions, but maybe even dictating, hey, this is only for shipborne assets, right? This data, we don't want it leaving, we don't want it being used by ground-based forces, because we don't want it potentially being exposed and things like that. So being able to sort of even allow you to control the risk and what you accept will enable further sharing, and also enable sort of these organizations to actually make use of their data rapidly, regardless of the more traditional, hey, do we have a link 16 set up? Has it been set up? Has it been run? Do we have keys? All that sort of things that are the more traditional way we would establish allegiances and communities and data sharing protocols.
Wayne, you triggered a thought, if I may. I think we've been spending a lot of time talking about, a military context, and that is important. But, let's also think about the rest of what government does. At DHS, for example, one of the hardest things to do is to organize and respond to a natural disaster at scale, right? And think about what FEMA does, right? They go into a place that has been annihilated by some disaster, some weather event, right? There is no infrastructure to speak of. People are hopefully surviving, right? But they're surviving day by day. They don't have the ability to communicate. There is no hard infrastructure. They don't have the ability to move around. That is a very similar use case to a military tactical use case. And it presents many of the same problems as a coalition operation in a far-flung place, right? Where now I've got agencies and state and local government entities and private actors.
Yeah, NGOs.
NGOs, right. Yeah. Civil society, right? Who are now getting involved in the response and recovery effort. And all of that has to be coordinated. That is a huge, thankless undertaking. And it requires all of those entities to be able to share information, potentially very sensitive information, particularly, PII, pertaining to people who have been affected by a disaster, as one example. And, information about their businesses, information about their personal finances that could be very, very sensitive. All of that has to be kept secure, but it also has to be shared. So how do you do that, right? And how do you pull that coalition together on a Tuesday that you didn't have on a Monday? Yeah. It was eye-opening working at DHS, if only for a couple of years, because though it's not as large as DoD, it's the third largest department of the federal government, it actually interacts more with the American public than any other part of government. There are more interactions between Americans and DHS than any other part of their government. Every time you go through an airport, you meet a TSA agent, right? Every time you come back into the country, you meet CBP. Anyone who's affected by a natural disaster, odds are they're going to work with FEMA at some point. That number of interactions, is astounding, and it presents a whole different ball game than militaries trying to interoperate with other militaries, which is important. But let's not forget that we're here to serve everyone, and those missions are very broad.
No, that I think that's spot on. I wish I could foot stomp it harder, make sure everybody actually hears what you guys said, because I mean, you guys bring decades of experience in the federal government space, just knowing it firsthand, and hearing from leaders that have moved from the government into the private sector here at Virtru. I just really appreciate you guys taking the time to shed some light here. I do want to say thanks for kind of giving the thumbs up to ZTDF and the capability. Like, as you all said, it's a government open standard. It's Virtru doesn't own it, right? And it's a capability that agencies and companies should be looking to, because over those next 1, 3, 5 years, if you want to do things like data level object security and be able to proactively share that data while maintaining positive control over it, like it's a great technology to look at. I just appreciate that you guys took the time to come on here today. For everybody here, I want to say thanks to Don and Wayne. Thanks for joining us, to everybody. Thanks for tuning in. And until next time, I'm Shannon Vaughn, and this is Hash It Out. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, leave us a 5-star review and don't miss us the next time we hash it out. Like, follow, and subscribe to us on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts, all linked below.